If you've ever wanted to make videos but you have no idea where to start, this is going to be the only beginner's guide that you ever have to watch. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to teach you the basics of videography so you can go from zero to shooting your first quality video today. Okay, I'm going to keep this as beginner friendly as I can and only give you the information that you need. What's up, guys? My name's JJ and I'm a self-taught videographer and filmmaker, and I run my own video production company based out of South Florida. So whether you're trying to make content for social media, short films, or even start your own videography business, this video will give you a solid foundation. And if you want a deeper dive into any of the topics that we talk about, I'll be breaking them down in future videos, so make sure that you're subscribed. And so we're going to start with everybody's favorite thing to talk about. What gear should you be getting? And I know you're probably tired of hearing everybody saying, gear doesn't matter, but while it's somewhat true, there's a little bit of nuance to it. Now, when it comes to choosing what camera to get, you can kind of feel a little spoiled for choice or even overwhelmed by what's out there. You could get an SLR, a DSLR, a mirrorless camera, an action camera. Do you get full frame or a micro four thirds sensor or a Super 35? Now, we're not going to get into all of that in this video, but for the most part, if you have a modern smartphone, you're basically good to go. Most modern smartphones can do 4K at 30 FPS, and that's really all you need to start out. But you're going to need the tips in the rest of this video to actually use it to its full potential. Now, what you want for your audio can vary. If you're going with the smartphone approach, there are a few cheap wired or wireless lavalier mics that you can use, or you can even get a small shotgun mic like this. Because now the thing is, the audio of your video actually matters more than your video does. I don't feel like enough people talk about it. If your audio doesn't sound good, nobody's going to want to watch. So if you have a budget to spend on gear, the first thing I would look into is getting a quality microphone. And lastly, lighting, which is actually going to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to making your image look good, whether you're shooting on an iPhone or a cinema camera. I would suggest investing into lights right under getting a quality microphone. You can either pick up a few cheap lights on Amazon, try to move around what you have on hand, or natural light is actually great in this scenario, and you can just shoot in front of an open window. All right, let's start with something that you're going to get very familiar with: camera settings. I guess I'll start out by saying, yes, you technically can just shoot with your camera on auto, but if you actually want your videos to look good, you're going to have to take the settings into your own hands. Now, if you're on your phone, most default camera apps aren't really going to give you the controls that you need. So you'll want to download a third-party app. One of my favorites is the Blackmagic camera app, which is made by one of my favorite camera companies. It will give you all of the professional controls that you need to follow along with what I'm talking about in this video. And so I'll start with frame rates. There's three main frame rates that we're going to want to talk about. The first one is 24 frames per second. That's usually attributed to cinematic video. It's what they use in movies. It tends to look the most cinematic. Another one is 30 frames per second. It's a bit more natural, I guess, and is really what I would recommend for making videos on YouTube or other social media platforms. And then lastly is 60 frames per second. Now, of course, you can go higher, you can go lower, but this is a beginner's guide, so we're not going to touch on those. 60 FPS, or frames per second, gives you 60 individual images per second, as you might have been able to guess. And that's good for action shots, or if you want to take that footage and then slow it down by 50%, therefore making it a 30 frame per second video. Next, let's talk shutter speed. If you want everything to seem the most natural and cinematic, you'll want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. And if you're wondering what that is, on your camera, you're going to want to look for the word shutter or this weird looking fraction. And now, depending on what your camera is set at right now, it's going to be different for everybody. But this is actually super simple for when you're shooting a video. For videos, you just want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate, unless you're going for a stylized look where you want it higher or lower. Next, we're going to talk about ISO or ISO. This controls how sensitive your camera is to light. So if you turn that number up higher, your image is going to get brighter, but it also introduces this called noise or grain. Basically, you're going to want to keep this as low as you possibly can. Or to be a little bit more advanced, you'll want it to be as close to your camera's base ISO as possible. Now, some cameras come with what is called dual native ISO, where they have two base ISO numbers that you could default to get a clean image. This next one's my favorite, and it's called aperture. This determines how much light is coming through the lens and reaching the sensor on your camera. If you're using a mirrorless or DSLR camera, you can actually see it in the lens if you look in your lens and adjust the aperture. And that, like ISO, controls how bright your image is, but also it determines how blurry your background is. Now, the lower that number is, or the more open your aperture is, the blurrier your background is going to be. Or the higher that number is, or the more closed your aperture is, the less blurry your background is going to be and the darker your image is going to look. Now, if this feels confusing, don't worry. I'll break this down in a later video on the exposure triangle, which encompasses all three. Next, let's talk lighting. Lighting is the fastest way to get your videos to look professional. You'll just want to follow these three simple rules. Make sure your subject is well lit, avoid harsh shadows, and separate your subject from the background, whether that's you, someone, or something else. I imagine you'd be far less inclined to watch this video if it looked like this, or even if it looked like this. A beginner setup that I recommended earlier is you place yourself in front of an open window and turn off the overhead lights, and that will actually go a long way to making your videos look professional. If you're filming outside during the day and you need to avoid harsh shadows, try filming in the shade or bring a diffuser, but my favorite one is shooting while it's overcast outside. And a bonus tip for you guys who want to make short films, slightly angled lighting is considered more cinematic than direct frontal lighting. And shooting from the side of the face that has a shadow on it can create more depth and make your shot look that much better. Now let's talk composition. You want your shots to look intentional. In a lot of cases, you can turn on this grid on your camera, and placing your subject on any one of those lines puts them on a third of the frame, and that is called the rule of thirds. For talking head videos, it's perfectly fine to position yourself right in the center of the camera. And then something that you'll want to pay attention to is giving your subject the right amount of headroom. You don't want to give them too much headroom and then they can kind of get lost in the frame, or too little headroom and then your video will feel claustrophobic. We want the background to be intentional. So if I place myself on this third again, the background here is my workstation, and there's not a lot of what's called negative space where there's nothing happening. There's a bit up here, but that's okay. But if I place myself on this third, this side of the frame can seem a lot more cluttered or seems like it has more weight than that side because there's a lot more negative space. Next, let's talk about audio. This can get really complicated if you really get into it, but we're just going over the basics. In most cases, you won't just want to stick with the built-in microphone that's in your camera or your phone. Bad audio will ruin your video faster than almost anything else. So the main thing I recommend is getting a cheap lavalier microphone. You can get a cheap wireless one or a cheap wired one that you can plug into your camera or whatever device you're using to shoot. And then try to get that microphone as close to your subject's mouth as you can for the cleanest, best audio. A simple number that you'll want to shoot for is about 3 inches from your subject's mouth. That's probably a number that some of us are more familiar with than others. So if you're struggling with audio, just try to get as close to your microphone as you can with either a lavalier mic or something like this, a small shotgun mic where you can mount it on top of the camera and it's a bit more directional with its audio pickup, and make sure it's pointed at your subject. And make sure you're filming in a quiet place. That background noise can get really distracting and it can turn people away from your video so fast. Lastly, I'll go over the basics of editing. Editing is where your video really comes together. A few editing programs that I recommend for beginners: if you're editing on your phone, number 1, CapCut. If you have an iPhone or a Mac, iMovie is also pretty good. And for PC, I recommend something like Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve. I myself have leaned into DaVinci Resolve a lot more as I've progressed in my career. It's a bit more advanced than the other softwares, and there's a free and a paid version. But with the free version, you'll be able to take care of at least 90% of whatever you want to do. But while editing, you'll just want to keep it simple, take out any mistakes that you made, cut out any pauses so that the video flows a little bit better. In most cases, you'll have a media bin, and that's where your footage will sit, and then you'll import that into what is called a timeline. And then you can just drag and drop the video where you need it to be. And then there should be a cut or a split tool that you can use to then cut up that video and delete the parts that you don't need. And when you're just starting out, basic clean cuts are probably what you're going to want to focus on rather than trying to do anything complicated. And really, it's okay to choose whatever editing software that you want, as long as it's DaVinci, because DaVinci's the best. I'm not biased, you're biased. And the biggest tip that I can have for you is when you're just starting out, don't overthink it. I used to, and that kept me paralyzed in the pit of indecision. So if you actually use the tips that I talked about in this video, you'll already be ahead of 80% of people. And like I said, if you're interested in learning more about any of these topics that we talked about, I will be making future videos that go into deeper detail on each of those. So if you want to level up fast, make sure you hit that subscribe button and comment deeper to let me know you're actually serious about this. Deeper. Should I really be having them comment deeper? Well, I already said it. I could cut it out and it probably doesn't really matter. And that's all for now, and I'll see you in the next video.